Hey, this is Epicenter NYC. We connect our communities to news, information, and each other. I'm your host, Amber Castillo. Walking along Crown Heights Buffalo Avenue, it's easy to miss a significant piece of New York City's Black history, the four homes that remain of Weeksville. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Weeksville probably wasn't part of your school's history classes, but it was a Black community established in the 1830s, shortly after slavery was abolished in New York State, but before it was abolished nationwide. Self-sufficient and politically active, it included parts of what's known today as Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, and Brownsville. Earlier this year, Epicenter NYC and the Weeksville Heritage Center teamed up to offer our members a special tour of what remains of the historic community. Epicenter's editorial director, Femi Redwood, joined the tour. In today's episode, she explains how this once-forgotten community continues to impact her lives today.
You know how sometimes you find yourself in situations where you think you know everything? That was me when I walked through the doors to tour the Weeksville Heritage Center. I know Black history, so I didn't expect to learn anything new. That couldn't be further from the truth. To understand Weeksville, you have to understand life in New York City in the 1830s. For the most part, slavery in the state had ended. However, the 1830 census showed 75 people were still enslaved. But for those who were free, freedom didn't necessarily mean peace. Black folks still faced racial violence and discrimination in housing, employment, and education. Even if you owned your own business, there was vandalism. And the only way Black men could vote was if they owned $250 worth of land, which was about the yearly income. Enter African-American abolitionist Henry C. Thompson. He understood the importance of land ownership. So in 1837, when a financial crisis caused wealthy white landowners to liquidate their holdings, Thompson bought 32 lots of land from the very rich Lefferts family. He encouraged other Black folks to buy land as well. In 1838, a Black dock worker named James Weeks bought 2 lots from Thompson. Weeks built a house for himself and essentially started the Black community that bore his name, Weeksville.
So my name is Dominique Jean-Louis. I am the chief historian at the Center for Brooklyn History, which is a part of the Brooklyn Public Library.
Dominique wasn't on the tour, but the history of Weeksville resonated with her throughout her career.
There's this time when African Americans are landowners, they're community members, they're thriving, they're educators, they're journalists and writers, and really making this stronghold of Black life.
Self-sufficient, free Black community.
That's Erica, the Vice President of Learning and Engagement at the Weeksville Heritage Center.
Weeksville is one of the first recognized free Black communities. And I say recognized because I think Black marginalized folks sort of on the outskirts know that we've been here existing, surviving, thriving, right? Whether the powers that be recognize us or not.
One thing that makes Weeksville special, it was born out of intention. Weeks and other founders knew they needed a better life, so they created it. Farmers, abolitionists, doctors, schools, churches, and at least one newspaper. Weeksville provided social and political rights. Remember, landowners could vote. And families were from everywhere, the North, South, Caribbean. Some were enslaved and escaped, others born free.
So we get this real sense of a diverse community that's finding each other and building something together.
New York City at the time was not incorporated. What we now call the island of Manhattan was one city. Brooklyn was a different city and a very rural city. There was no bridge. The lack of infrastructure kept Brooklyn largely separated from Manhattan, which helped Weeksville prosper. By 1855, there were more than 500 people who lived there. They could earn a living, give their kid an education, and be safe from racial violence. Families in Weeksville were protected against the Fugitive Slave Act. Long story short, in 1850, Congress passed a law that said enslaved people must be returned to their enslavers, even if that enslaved person was in a free state. Here's what that meant in reality. Any Black New Yorker could be walking down the street, kidnapped, and sent to the South if a white person claimed they were enslaved. And yes, it happened. But kidnappers weren't exactly trying to hop on a boat and then trudge through the woods of Brooklyn. Historians say Weeksville was also likely to be helpful to people using the Underground Railroad.
So there's not a smoking gun. We don't know for sure that Weeksville was a quote unquote stop on the Underground Railroad, but it's clear that the political affinities and the social network would have been pretty sympathetic to the cause of ending slavery and offering freedom to people who are seeking it. And we happen to know that a good number of African Americans who are living in Weeksville, many of them were Southern born. These little pieces of evidence kind of come together to say it's a pretty good guess that if not Weeksville itself was a stop on the Underground Railroad, it certainly would have been a place where maybe people who had emancipated themselves from slavery ended up, or a place where Weeksville residents were providing support for those who were helping. So this was definitely an important stronghold of African Americans who are fighting against the institution of slavery and providing resources and help for those who are also fighting against it, and maybe for those who were escaping. Because while the Underground Railroad is important, it's so necessary that we understand that the larger abolitionist movement and the larger network and support system that was needed to fight against slavery does not begin and end with the Underground Railroad. So while we can have an educated guess that it was involved, it wasn't necessarily the only way that Weeksville residents could have been part of the fight against slavery.
My name is Peter Bunton, and I am the executive director of the Mid-Hudson Anti-Slavery History Project. We are located in Poughkeepsie, Dutchess County, New York.
That's Peter Bunton. He was on the tour with me, and he's the executive director of the Mid-Hudson Anti-Slavery History Project, which is a part of the Underground Railroad Consortium of New York State. Bunton and his colleagues are creating a map to locate other free Black communities that existed in the state. He's been researching how they work together.
The mythology of the Underground Railroad is all of these poor, downtrodden, enslaved people running away and getting helped by all these wondrous white Quakers and other white people to get into Canada. That's a myth.
He says, of course, there were some white families helping, but Black families were also saving themselves.
So throughout New York City, you had a number of operations that were set up to help the movement of runaways, or freedom seekers is the better term, to help move them. And one of the major occupations of both enslaved Blacks, which is interesting, and also free Blacks, were working on boats. Some were boat pilots, some were stewards, etc. So there would be some natural affinity between the freedom seekers and the free Blacks who were already working to help that movement along.
Some of those operations were connected to free Black towns.
What we would call communities of Black resistance.
Like Weeksville.
It would have been a safe house. They would have known that this was a place that the people there could be trusted to help you. And that's one of those aspects is relying on information along the line, whether we call it a railroad line or some other means of communication. You had to hope you would get information saying, go here, this is how to get there, and there will be someone there to help you.
Those way stations could be homes, schools, or places of worship, like Weeksville's AME Church. Weeksville was one of the safest places to be during the 1863 draft riots. Let me set the scene. For years, newspapers had been running sensational stories warning the white working class, including immigrants, that if slavery ended nationwide, Black folks would move to the North, marry young white women, and create mayhem. Plus, there were lots of New Yorkers who aligned themselves with Southern ideology. Some Northern soldiers actually protested President Abraham Lincoln's emancipation. They joined the military to preserve the Union, not end slavery. Meanwhile, the federal government needed more men to fight in the Civil War. It initiated a draft that would force male citizens to fight. That included Irish immigrants. Irish immigrants who had been reading newspapers saying Black folks would take their jobs and marry their daughters. It's worth noting Black men couldn't be drafted because they were not citizens. Good times. Irish immigrants were mad and unleashed their rage throughout Manhattan, especially on Black people.
So in, the middle of a hot July in 1863, after the military draft, the first round had been announced, a mob of white New Yorkers specifically targeted Black institutions and family in New York City with violence, brickbats and torches, and Black people were lynched on light poles in the streets of New York City. It was an incredibly dangerous and violent time. It's actually the largest kind of social uprising in New York City's history. This was a great amount of people. The death count, it's hard to tell exactly, but the numbers range from dozens to 1,000. So we know there was a tremendous loss of life. And it was just terrifying. I mean, this was true terrorism, the sense that African Americans it was open season, no one was safe. And this took place over a course of a few nights in July 1863.
5 days of unbridled terror. Black folks were lynched and institutions torched.
The Colored Orphan Asylum on 42nd, 43rd Street was burned to the ground.
The kids were forced to escape out of a back door. Many Black families left Manhattan for Weeksville.
Many Black New Yorkers say, you know what? I don't think there's a future for us here where we can stay safe, where we can keep our families safe. The best move is to leave. Because even if you didn't lose your life during the draft riots, many Black homes were burned to the ground. It's great that place existed. I can't imagine that sense of, the fires are burning all around you. I have no idea where to go. And there's a sense of like, oh, there's a place where we can be safe. Let's go there. I'm so glad Weeksville existed for those people, because I couldn't imagine being on the run and feeling like you had nowhere to turn.
The demographics of Brooklyn has changed over the years. Same goes for Weeksville. Some Black families left and some white families came. Homes were demolished and apartment complexes were built. And through the years, Weeksville was just kinda overshadowed by Brooklyn's growth, its significance largely forgotten.
1960s in Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights was a rough time. People just didn't have enough of what they needed. And while activists were very involved in trying to get people food, trying to get people housing, trying to get people political rights, trying to get people access to their history is just as important. It's just as vital to a community's thriving.
So in 1968, an educator who was also a historian and a pilot went to look for it. They surveyed the neighborhood from a low-altitude plane and discovered 4 small buildings, dilapidated, overgrown with bushes, but original and standing along a dirt path, once called Hunter Fly Road. People in the neighborhood didn't realize what was literally in their backyard. In fact, neighbors' kids used to play in these homes not knowing they were built as early as the 1840s. The community rallied, held an archaeological dig, Boy Scouts, neighbors, children from a nearby school, and they uncovered artifacts that brought Weeksville back to life. In 1972, thanks to grassroots preservation, it was named a city landmark and listed on the National Register of Historic Homes.
With really nothing to go off of but relationships and hope, really built this Weeksville Heritage Center and movement from the ground up, quite literally.
The Weeksville Heritage Center preserves the homes and shares the empowering stories of its past residents. They also offer tours, which is what I went on with Epicenter NYC members. We went inside 3 of the homes, each one set up as it would have been in the 1840s through the 1930s. One even had an antique straightening comb that Black women would heat on the stove before running through their hair. It felt like I was truly seeing life through the eyes of someone long gone. It was also a reminder that while Black pain was in abundance during that time, there was also joy. Whether it was a family enjoying dinner in their formal dining room or a child playing baseball in the security of his neighborhood, these homes share stories that can't be told with words alone. Here's Erica from the Weeksville Heritage Center, who you heard from earlier.
we're really lucky here at Weeksville that we have physical remnants of historic Weeksville on site via our historic homes. However, there are countless free Black communities we will never know about because they have been disappeared. And so to have those physical remnants and to be able to take people through the houses and tour them is a gem.
Epicenter members who were on the tour agreed.
I think I waited far too long to come to Weeksville Heritage Center. I think it's a gem. And I appreciated not only the emphasis on knowing history, but that history changes over time as new information is uncovered and recontextualized.
A lot of gratitude, really grateful that somehow miraculously these houses were not destroyed. They did not burn down over the centuries, decades, that they're still here and that we're able to, that they are tangible ways to time travel and to really experience history.
And that history shaped the country. For example, Dominique said Weeksville had the first New York City public school with integrated teachers.
You can argue maybe one of the reasons that we have a more integrated school system now, although it still is a long way from being perfectly integrated, some of those strides towards a more equitable system were possible because a community like Weeksville existed where this could be tried out. You could have white teachers and Black teachers working side by side, and that felt natural. The community supported it, and it had the chance to develop.
And as Erica points out, it continues to play a role in the broader context of education.
Look at Texas. Look at Florida. Look at what's happening with our history books. Look at the ways in which history is being told, retold, and that people are being erased, right? And so, again, to have a site like this that people can come to, that we can sort of tell our own stories. We can say, no, right? Like this place existed, right? And the sort of our ancestors are still here with us, but also descendants of Weeksville are still here. And those ideas around what does it take to really build community is something that's like so important to me now. And I think will continue to be important for us as we try to build the world that we all actually want to see.
Peter agrees.
We have to respond to the calls by so many people today, it seems, and states who are trying to suppress Black history. And if we don't, as educators, as historians, as concerned people, if we don't speak up, if we don't try to bring to light this history and tell the true history of America, then there's always going to be, and this may be pie in the sky wishful thinking, but there's always going to be this unexamined and unresolved tension. I believe our core dissension has to do with race. And unless we understand that and understand the connection of race to the economic development of capitalism, we don't really have much of a chance of improving.
Erica believes understanding the value of Weeksville and its stories will help guide the future.
We look at gentrification, especially in a city like New York. The neighborhood is rapidly changing. And so we're still being disappeared and erased in real time. And so to have the actual physical remnants, an actual site, also we focus on education here. We have an art gallery, so we have a space we're able to bring in contemporary voices to continue these conversations around independence, enfranchisement, right? We're really at risk of losing the fabric of this community. And so to have Weeksville smack dab in the middle of the neighborhood I think is so incredibly powerful. People pass here every day. They don't always know what we are, but we smile at them through the glass and they come in and able to walk through the space, engage in it, and hopefully learn something, right? And then also hopefully then go tell someone else in the community and they come on in too.
It's important that we know that African Americans have always cared about looking back in our history and preserving our stories. And the fact that this cultural center sits on this hallowed ground in and of itself is a testament to how important our history is to us, how important looking back is to us, and how important history is in uplifting existing Black communities.
I've been thinking a lot about the legacy of Weeksville since going on the tour, specifically how one man's action went to help everyone.
Having that community thrive, thriving Black life produces, raises tides for all ships, right? That you have more integrated schools, you have chances for new Black newspapers. You have people like Rachel Lyons, who can become the first Black school principal in New York City. And, Black school principals today can look to her as an example and a kind of role model in history. And so I think it's so important to know about Weeksville because both the history of Black Brooklyn, I think, stretches back further than a lot of people are familiar with. And also that this is a pretty sustained chain of families and professions and networks that really in some ways exist to today.
A legacy that reminds us the togetherness of a community has the power to create a better world.
Erica says Weeksville needs two things to survive. One, people need to know it exists. And two, preservation costs money. So if you have a free afternoon, you should check it out. To learn more about how to support and visit Weeksville, head to weeksvillesociety.org. And for more stories and events like this, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at epicenter-nyc.com/subscribe. That's all for today. Thanks for listening and thanks for supporting us as we do our best to support our community. We couldn't do it without you. Our intro music is All the Pretty Horses by Karavika. You can find more of their music on their website linked to in our podcast description.